I never thought I'd have to fight for my right to be a mother. Not in a courtroom. Not against the man who once promised to build a life with me. 23 days ago, I sat in a courtroom and listened as my ex-husband's lawyer told the judge I was a danger to my own children. That I was volatile, unpredictable, that I couldn't be trusted. I'd spent months preparing for that hearing, gathering evidence, rehearsing answers with my attorney, steeling myself for the battle ahead. But nothing prepared me for what happened when my sister Julia, who I hadn't spoken to in nearly 3 years, walked through those courtroom doors. If you've ever had your character assassinated by someone who knows exactly which lies will hurt you most, if you've ever sat silently while watching your life being redefined by someone else's narrative, hit that subscribe button right now, because what I'm about to share might just give you the strength to reclaim your own story. And if you're wondering if fighting back is worth it, even when all the odds seem stacked against you, tap that like button. I promise you, staying silent isn't the same as staying strong. Leave a comment if you've ever found courage in unexpected places. This is the story of how my estranged sister saved me with 6 simple words. That's not who my sister is. I'm Eleanor Reese. 5 years ago, I was a wildlife photographer with an exhibition in the Museum of Natural Science and a book deal. Then I met Thomas Canton at a fundraiser for endangered species conservation. He was charismatic, passionate about environmental law, and seemed to understand my need for creative freedom in a way no one else ever had. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Within a year, we were married. A year after that, our twins, Sophie and Milo, were born. I scaled back my work, transitioning to local photography assignments and teaching workshops while Thomas's environmental law practice flourished. The changes were subtle at first. Comments about how my impulsivity might affect the twins. Suggestions that my artistic temperament made me less equipped for the daily routines children need. Each criticism wrapped carefully in concern, delivered with a kiss on my forehead. "You just get so lost in your projects, Ellie," he'd say. "I worry about the kids when you're in one of your creative phases." By our 4th anniversary, I barely recognized myself. The woman who had once spent weeks tracking snow leopards in the Himalayas now second-guessed her ability to schedule a playdate. The photographer whose work had been praised for its boldness now deleted images Thomas thought were too provocative for my portfolio. I didn't see it then, how he was gradually replacing my self-image with his version of who I was, who I should be. The breaking point came during what should have been a celebration. After years of barely picking up my professional camera, I'd been commissioned to shoot a series on urban wildlife corridors. The magazine wanted me specifically, had seen my earlier work, and reached out. I was ecstatic. Thomas was not. "This again?" he'd said when I showed him the email. "I thought we'd move past your wilderness phase." When I insisted on taking the assignment, 3 weeks of dawn and dusk shoots, with childcare arranged for those hours, things escalated. Thomas began documenting my behavior, as he called it. Every time I came home late from a shoot. Every time I was too tired to make dinner. Every time the twins were upset because I missed bedtime. I discovered later he'd been recording our conversations, selectively editing them to capture moments of frustration or exhaustion. 2 months after I completed the assignment, he moved out, taking the twins with him while I was at a meeting with the magazine editors. I came home to an empty house and a note saying he and the children were somewhere safe. 3 days later, I was served with papers. Thomas was filing for sole custody, claiming I had shown escalating patterns of instability and prioritized career ambitions over the children's well-being. The evidence? A carefully curated collection of recordings, emails taken out of context, and statements from concerned friends who, coincidentally, were all connected to Thomas's law practice. I later learned he'd been planning this for over a year, building a case while sleeping beside me every night, smiling at me across the dinner table, telling me he loved me. The most effective part of Thomas's strategy wasn't the legal maneuvering, it was the isolation. My sister Julia and I had been close growing up, but we'd drifted apart after I married Thomas. She never liked him, said he reminded her of our father, who had the same talent for making criticism sound like love. I defended Thomas, accused Julia of jealousy, of not understanding the compromises marriage required. Our last conversation had been brutal. I told her she had no right to judge my choices when she couldn't even maintain a relationship longer than 6 months. She'd told me I was becoming a ghost of myself. We both said unforgivable things. After that, Thomas had suggested we take a break from my family, just until things settled. Somehow, that break stretched into years. With my family connections severed and most of my professional network lost during the years I'd scaled back my career, I had few people to turn to when Thomas left. The friends we shared as a couple quietly disappeared, not wanting to take sides. My attorney was compassionate but realistic about my chances against someone with Thomas's connections in the legal community. "Your ex-husband is well regarded by the local judiciary," she explained, "and he's framed this as concern for the children, not as an attack on you. That plays well with family court judges." By the time the custody hearing approached, I was living in a small apartment, working whatever photography jobs I could get, seeing the twins only during supervised visits twice a week. Sophie had started calling me Eleanor instead of Mom, because that's what she heard her father say. Milo still clung to me during visits, but grew increasingly anxious as pickup time approached. I was watching my children being taught to fear me, and I felt powerless to stop it. The week before the final custody hearing, Thomas's legal team filed a motion with devastating new evidence. A therapist Thomas had selected for the twins had submitted a report stating they showed anxiety consistent with exposure to unpredictable parenting. My supervised visitation reports, which had been largely positive, were contradicted by a new supervisor who claimed I displayed concerning mood swings and boundary issues. Most damaging was the claim that my sister Julia had cut contact with me due to erratic and frightening behavior, and had allegedly told Thomas she was concerned for the children's safety in my care. The irony was biting. Julia, who had tried to warn me about Thomas, was now being used as a weapon against me. And because we hadn't spoken in years, I had no way of knowing if she'd actually said these things, or if this was another of Thomas's fabrications. My attorney called with blunt advice. "We need to consider accepting a settlement. Supervised visitation isn't ideal, but it keeps you in their lives. If we go to trial with this new evidence, you could lose even that." That night, I hit my lowest point. I sat on the kitchen floor of my apartment at 3 a.m., surrounded by photos of the twins, wondering if they would be better off without this constant battle. Without a mother, they were being taught to fear. Maybe Thomas was right. Maybe my creative intensity, as he called it, did make me unsuitable. I called the crisis hotline. The counselor who answered stayed with me until sunrise, helping me remember who I was before Thomas began rewriting my narrative, helping me find the strength for one more day, one more fight. I told my attorney I would not settle. I would not accept being labeled as dangerous to my own children without standing up and speaking my truth, even if I had to do it alone. The day of the hearing, I dressed in clothes that felt like me, not the subdued, appropriate mother wardrobe Thomas had gradually curated during our marriage. I wore a deep blue blouse I'd bought on my last photography expedition, simple black pants, and the silver earrings my grandmother had given me. Small acts of reclamation. Thomas arrived with his legal team, 3 attorneys in matching charcoal suits. He didn't look at me directly, but I caught the slight lift at the corner of his mouth when he saw me sitting alone with my single attorney. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a reputation for traditional family values, reviewed the case files before proceedings began. I watched her expression as she read, trying to gauge my chances. She gave nothing away. As Thomas's lead attorney began presenting their case, I forced myself to stay present, to not dissociate as I had during previous hearings. I needed to feel this, all of it, to remember why I was fighting. His attorney laid out the narrative methodically. My unstable childhood moving between divorced parents, my reckless career choices that included dangerous travel to conflict zones, my erratic emotional patterns following the birth of the twins, my obsessive return to work after years of being a stay-at-home mother. Each piece carefully selected and arranged to create a portrait of a woman too volatile, too selfish, too unstable to parent effectively. I listened to this stranger describe a version of me I didn't recognize, yet one that had been crafted with just enough truth to seem plausible. The travels had been professional assignments, not recklessness. The emotional struggles after the twins were born had been postpartum depression that I'd sought treatment for. The return to work had been one assignment that Thomas had initially supported, but in the remixing of my history, context disappeared. Nuance vanished. All that remained was the caricature Thomas needed me to be for his narrative to work. Then came the moment that Thomas's attorney mentioned my sister. "Your Honor, we have sworn testimony from the respondent's own sister, Julia Reese, expressing grave concerns about her siblings' emotional stability and potential risk to the children." My heart sank. So Julia had turned against me too. The isolation was complete. My attorney leaned over. "Did you know about this?" I shook my head, unable to speak past the tightness in my throat, and then a commotion at the back of the courtroom. The door opening, footsteps, the bailiff moving to intercept someone. I didn't turn around, couldn't bear to see who else had come to witness my humiliation, until I heard her voice. "That's a lie. I never gave any testimony." "Julia, my sister Julia was here." The judge looked up sharply. "Who are you?" "Julia Reese, Your Honor. Eleanor's sister. And I need to correct the record immediately." The judge signaled the bailiff to let her approach. As Julia walked past me, our eyes met for the first time in 3 years. Hers were fierce, determined, nothing like the wounded anger I remembered from our last encounter. Thomas's attorney began to object, but the judge held up her hand. "I'm very interested in hearing from Miss Reese, given that you've introduced statements allegedly from her." Julia stood before the bench, her posture military straight, a remnant of her years in the army that even civilian life hadn't softened. "Your Honor, I have never spoken to Mr. Canton's attorneys. I have never provided testimony about my sister's parenting, and I certainly never expressed concerns about the children's safety in her care." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Are you aware that statements attributed to you have been submitted to this court?" "I became aware yesterday, Your Honor. A colleague who works in family law spotted my name in the filing system and contacted me. I flew in from Colorado last night to address this directly." Julia turned slightly, her gaze landing on Thomas with the precision of a sniper. "I have not spoken to Thomas Canton in over 2 years. The last communication I had with him was a cease and desist letter after he contacted my commanding officer with false claims about my conduct, attempting to damage my military career." The courtroom fell silent. Thomas's carefully constructed facade began to crack. His attorney whispered urgently to him, but he seemed frozen, unable to respond. Julia continued, her voice steady. "What I would like to tell this court is who my sister actually is, if you'll permit me." The judge nodded. "Please proceed, Miss Reese." Julia didn't look at notes. She didn't hesitate. "My sister is one of the most stable, grounded people I know. Her work as a photographer took her to challenging environments because she believed in documenting endangered species and ecosystems, work that has helped conservation efforts worldwide. She approached those assignments with meticulous planning and preparation, not recklessness. When the twins were born, Eleanor restructured her entire career to be present for them. She experienced postpartum depression and sought professional help immediately, a sign of responsibility, not instability. She has always put her children first, even when it meant setting aside professional opportunities many would consider once in a lifetime. Julia turned to look at me, then back to the judge. "What I've witnessed over the years of her marriage to Thomas Canton was not instability from my sister. It was the systematic dismantling of her confidence, her independence, and her sense of self. I watched as she became increasingly isolated, increasingly doubtful of her own perceptions and abilities." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "I've brought documentation, Your Honor. Emails from Mr. Canton to me where he misrepresented conversations with my sister. Texts where he claimed Eleanor had said things about me that I later confirmed she never said. A pattern of triangulation and manipulation that I recognize now was designed to separate my sister from her support system." The judge accepted the folder, reviewed its contents briefly, then looked at Thomas's attorney. "Counselor, I'd like an explanation as to how testimony from Miss Leah Reese appears in your filings when she clearly has not provided any. Thomas's attorney stammered about information provided by our client and misunderstandings. The controlled narrative was unraveling in real time. The judge turned to Julia again. Is there anything else you wish to add, Miss Reese? Just one thing, Your Honor. I made a terrible mistake letting Thomas come between me and my sister. I failed to recognize what was happening until it was too late. But I'm here now, and I'm prepared to testify under oath about the pattern of isolation and control I witnessed during their marriage. As Julia returned to her seat, she paused beside me and squeezed my shoulder. That simple touch, the first physical contact with my sister in years, broke something open inside me. I had been holding myself together so tightly, afraid that showing any emotion would confirm Thomas's narrative about my instability. But in that moment, I allowed myself to feel, not to fall apart, but to reconnect with the strength I'd buried to survive. The judge called a 30-minute recess. When court resumed, everything had shifted. The judge ordered a complete review of all evidence submitted by Thomas's team for verification. She appointed a new guardian ad litem for the twins. Most importantly, she modified the temporary custody arrangement, removing the supervision requirement for my visitation and increasing my time with the children to equal Thomas's. Thomas didn't look at me as he left the courtroom. The script he'd so carefully crafted had failed him, and he had no improvised lines ready. That was nearly a month ago. Since then, much has changed. The guardian ad litem's initial report documented concerning coaching behaviors from Thomas and a clear preference from both children to spend more time with me. The court-appointed therapist noted that the anxiety the twins had been experiencing reduced significantly during unsupervised time in my care. Sophie has stopped calling me Eleanor. Last weekend, she fell asleep in my lap while I read to her, something that hadn't happened in over a year. Milo has started telling me about his day without constantly looking over his shoulder to see if anyone is listening. Thomas has been ordered to attend co-parenting classes and therapy. His attorneys have indicated openness to a more balanced custody arrangement, though the final decision is still pending. But the most profound change has been internal. For years, I had internalized Thomas's narrative about me. That my creative passion was a liability, that my independence was dangerous, that my emotions made me unfit. I had begun to doubt not just my capacity as a mother, but my very perception of reality. Now I'm remembering who I am. I've started taking photographs again, not just assignments, but images that speak to me. I've reconnected with colleagues who reached out after hearing about the custody battle. I'm rebuilding, step by careful step, and Julia has become a regular presence in our lives. She's transferred to a reserve unit closer to us, taken a civilian job in the area. The twins adore their aunt, and we're slowly healing the rift that Thomas created between us. We talk openly now about what happened, how he manipulated us both, playing on my insecurities and her protective instincts to turn us against each other. It's still hard sometimes. I catch myself slipping into old patterns of doubt, of second-guessing my decisions. Recovery from coercive control isn't linear, but I'm moving forward, eyes open, surrounded by people who see me clearly. Looking back, I understand now what made Thomas's tactics so effective. He didn't just attack me directly, he reconstructed reality around me until I couldn't trust my own perceptions. He used my strengths against me, my openness to feedback, my willingness to compromise, my commitment to co-parenting, and twisted them into weapons, and he very nearly succeeded. If Julia hadn't walked into that courtroom, if she hadn't found the courage to speak truth to power, I might have lost my children. Not because I was actually dangerous or unfit, but because I had been so thoroughly convinced of my own inadequacy that I couldn't effectively fight back. This experience has taught me that silence is not always surrender, but it's not always strength either. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is speak our truth, even when our voice shakes. Sometimes the most powerful response to a narrative of control is simply to tell our own story, unedited and unfiltered. I've learned that resilience isn't about never breaking. It's about how we piece ourselves back together. It's about recognizing that the broken places don't make us weaker, but more authentic, more complete. And I've learned that family, real family, isn't defined by who shares our blood or our name. It's defined by who stands beside us when the storms come, who speaks truth when lies threaten to drown us, who remembers who we are when we've forgotten. I'm sharing this story because I know there are others out there living some version of what I experienced. People whose reality is being rewritten by someone who claims to love them. People who have begun to doubt their own worth, their own perception, their own capacity for love and care. If that's you, if you're watching this and something in my story resonates in your bones, I want you to know that the doubt you feel was planted there. It isn't yours. It doesn't belong to you. Your truth matters. Your experience is valid, and you deserve to be seen clearly, not through the distorted lens someone else has created. Recovery starts with one person who believes you. Sometimes that person has to be yourself. Sometimes it's a stranger on a crisis line at 3 a.m. Sometimes it's someone from your past who shows up exactly when you need them most. If my story touched something in you, please subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment about your own experience. Your story might be the lifeline someone else is searching for. And if you're in the thick of it right now, if you're fighting to be seen, to be heard, to be believed, please know you're not alone. The person who's trying to define you doesn't get the final word. Your story is still being written, and you are its author. Thank you for witnessing my journey, for being on the other side of this camera during one of the hardest stories I've ever had to tell. Sometimes the path back to ourselves isn't about finding something new. It's about remembering what was true all along.